Michael Shawn, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me on. I just got in from the Darién Gap and up in beautiful Tennessee now.
Yeah. I'm sure this is quite the change of scenery for you.
It is. I mean, yeah, literally just the other day or 2 days ago, we're surrounded by NGOs like IOM, International Organization for Migration, the main engine of the invasion.
Man, well, we got a lot to talk about today. Me and you have been going back and forth for, about 6 months now. So I just want to say thank you for finally getting here and sitting down. I know you have a lot to educate the American people on, and I'm dying to get into this. So
you have no idea how many people send me messages. You got to go on with Shawn. You got to go on. I'm like, we're trying, I'm in the jungle. He's got new family members. Things going on.
I will get down there with you shortly, but just got to let my kids get just a little bit older. But so in this interview, I want to cover the Darién Gap, obviously. What is it? What's going on down there? I know you have some stuff to talk about with the border, with the famine, the oncoming famine that you're saying is coming. And so I want to just divulge into all of that stuff and get it all out there and educate the audience. But let me give you a quick introduction here. Michael Shawn, former Green Beret, American writer and photographer. You've lived most of your life overseas, traveling or living in almost 100 different countries. That's a lot of countries. Served in special forces in the early 80s, became a writer in the 1990s, reported from Iraq and Afghanistan. You've been doing that since December of 2004, author of Moment of Truth in Iraq. You've authored 6 books, including 3 on Chinese information war, which I love talking about what's going on between us and China and how that affects us. Reported on the ground from the 2019 Hong Kong protest. Goes on, started getting into reporting on Iraq after attending many friends' funerals where people said what is being portrayed in the media is not actually what's happening there. Thank you for doing that. International trips to report from Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Canada, Singapore, Bahrain, the Philippines, the Darién Gap, the list goes on. My favorite piece of information about you is that you provided security for the infamous pop star Michael Jackson.
The Michael.
So, man, I'll bet you got some stories from that, huh?
Actually, all I did was my calculus homework at Neverland.
Right.
I was just learning derivatives and that sort of thing. I mentioned to you a story when I was in Afghanistan. After Michael Jackson died, I went out to this village. It was one of those remote villages, like 50 miles beyond the electrical lines, right? There's the tree line and then there's the electrical line.
Yeah.
And so I'm out there, and I was with the village chief. I said, "Do you know Michael Jackson died?" He's like, "Oh, the Michael." Yeah. Yes, we know the Michael. Starts doing the beard thing that, they do. Rubbing. Yes, the Michael. Please tell your people we cry 1 million Pashtun tears for the Michael. Yeah. They love Michael Jackson. They're out there moonwalking, and the children, everywhere I go, whether it's the Darién Gap or some remote village in Afghanistan or Nepal, everybody wants to do the moonwalk. The children, of course.
Everybody knows Michael Jackson, right?
Yep.
But, Michael, before we get into the Darién Gap and everything that you've got to push out about that, everybody gets a gift on the show.
Oh, thank you, sir.
There you go.
Should I open it now or later?
Go ahead, open it up.
Oh, gummy bears. I was told you love to hand out gummy bears.
Gummy bears. Vigilance League gummy bears. Legal in all 50 states, believe it or not. It's just candy made right here in the USA.
Right.
Which you can't say about very many things these days, right?
Yeah, made in the USA, like we are.
Yep.
Speaking of made in the USA, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Made in the USA, you were a Navy SEAL. I grew up with Scott Helvenston, and we talked about my 2 friends that led me to the war. One was an old Green Beret teammate, Richard Ferguson. He was killed in Iraq in March 30th, 2004, and in Tikrit. And within one day of that, Scott Helvenston was killed. Scott was the youngest Navy SEAL in history, actually. I've said this before. He was 17 when he made it through all the buds and whatnot. And people say bullshit, but it actually was true. And we went to school together. We played football together. We worked out together. We chased girls together. He was, again, like Goggins level crazy and fit. He was a super stud. And Scott made it into unbelievable. And so then, unfortunately, he was killed in Fallujah. He was one of the Blackwater contractors that hanged off the bridge. Man. And so I went to his funeral in Florida, and I went to Fergie's funeral, my old Green Beret teammate, and actually I was one of the younger Green Berets as well at 19. So it was interesting because we went to the same high school, and a lot of the people from that high school went off to Delta or SEALs or whatever. It was something about it. Like the coaches weren't there was no first and second and third place and all. It was first place and losers. Right? Yeah. That's it. And, these were very serious coaches, very serious teachers. Military was revered. And just being, an American was revered and still is, right? Yeah. So we went off so I went to the funerals. I went to Scott's funeral in Florida, and the SEALs that were there were like, the war, the journalists were all lying about the war. There were journalists from all over the world at Scott's funeral. It was disgusting. And I mean, hanging outside his mother's house, I was inside of his mother's house, and we were talking, and there was like literally somebody from Japan trying to, shoot through the window with literally all over the world because it was so contentious at that time, right? And then I went to Fergie's funeral in Colorado, and there it was a lot of Green Berets and that sort of thing. And again, they were saying, you should go to the war. And I'm like, I'm not going to the war. It's quite dangerous, and I'm busy, right, doing other stuff. But then when Scott was killed in particular and his three friends at Blackwater, that's when the United States attacked Fallujah, of course. And then it caused a huge amount of people to flood into the war from Yemen and Morocco and Europe, everywhere. Who's who in the zoo? It was the Star Wars Cafe showed up to the war. So if you look at icasualties.org, you'll see the casualties just explode at that time. Man. And so as that year unfolds in 2004, I had another friend. We all went to school together. Scott was now gone, and another one was Rodney Morris, and we also played on the same football team with Scott, but he was the first ID Provost Marshal, 1st Infantry Division Provost Marshal, and he was calling me up every week, Michael, when are you coming to the war? And I'm like, Rodney, I love you, brother, but I am not coming to the war. And finally, it comes down to October of 2004, and Operation Phantom Fury starts to kick off on Fallujah again. Because remember, after the contractors, Scott was killed, and then we attacked Fallujah, the war just exploded. And now to, really teach them a lesson, we kicked off Operation Phantom Fury and flattened Fallujah, really seriously that time. And that's when I realized, hey, this is an insurgency. And that's something I just spent quite a bit of time out with the Maoists in Nepal and that sort of thing. I didn't write anything about it, but I spent a year in Nepal. So, wow. I mean, I was watching these things, right? And so that was when I said to Rodney Morris, the provost marshal that went to high school with, I said, okay, I'll come. And so I went in December of 2004, and immediately there was so much combat, I was actually surprised. I thought it was, in fact, at that point, I thought CNN was understating it. I mean, there was so many airstrikes going on and, tracers flying up into the night and explosions in Baghdad. So the first thing I did was ask, I flew up to Tikrit, where Rodney was, and I said, what unit do you have that's in the most combat that will let me go with them? So I went back down to Bakuba, and that's when it started. From then on, I just did as much combat as I could do, and I did it for years. And so, and that sort of, I was never a war, at some point people were like, you're just an adrenaline junkie or a war junkie. And I'm like, that doesn't fit the fact pattern. I did not go to the war until 3 years into it, right? And then when I did go to it, I went full bore, as our type tend to do. Yeah. And so that's how that all started, by the way. So people often wonder, but that's how it happened.
In the special ops community, it's a all or nothing way of life.
There's winners and there's losers.
That's right.
That's it. We don't get second place against World Economic Forum or the Chinese Communist Party. We either win or we die. That's what's right. Coming.
So, Michael, I know you've been down at the Darién Gap several times. How many times have you been down there?
Well, let's say how much time I've spent there at this point, because I've lost track of times. I noticed that with war correspondent work too. By the people that tell you how many times they've been in the war haven't spent much time there. But since Biden was installed, I've been there probably 6 months. I guess we would have to ask, Panamanian immigration how much time I've spent in Panama. But so how many times have I been into the Darién? I don't know, at least 50, quite a lot. I'm down there. I was just down there with Epoch Times and Laura Loomer was there and Misako Ganaha from Japan, Mara Macy. We're starting to take groups down there that can call for fire on the NGOs.
Good for you. So before we get into what you're doing down there, can you give us a basic explanation of what the Darién Gap is and why it's pertinent to what we're talking about?
Yeah, the Darién Gap is one of the, let's say Panama. Let's widen that slightly to Panama. Panama is one of the most important pieces of land on earth to the United States. A lot of Americans don't get this. Our grandparents got it. For instance, Fort Clayton is the old U.S. Army South headquarters. And a lot of American veterans watching this will know exactly where we're talking about, right? It's been taken over by more than 6 NGOs, mostly UN. But skipping past the details of that's been taken over by our enemies. Fort Clayton is literally one of the most important little postage stamp sized pieces of land on planet Earth for Americans. Right outside the windows there of IOM headquarters, which is the International Organization for Migration, which is the chief engine of the invasion, is right outside their office windows in Building 110 is the Miraflores Locks, the Panama Canal, and the Panama Canal Railway, which is also important, and the Thatcher Ferry Bridge. The Thatcher Ferry Bridge is the bridge from Highway 1 that goes down from the Darién Gap, from the edge of the Darién Gap, all the way to Prudhoe Bay, Alaska, right? So in other words, once you get on Highway 1, after you emerge from the Darién Gap, you get in buses straight to America, straight shot. So in other words, from the IOM headquarters, to repeat this, the Miraflores Locks are right there. You're watching ships go by. I'm watching them constantly because I rent a hotel right beside them, right? Mm-hmm. And there's the Panama Canal. There's the railway. There's the Thatcher Ferry Bridge. This is amazingly important to the United States. And right behind you is the old U.S. Army South headquarters. And they've taken it. Literally our enemies have taken our headquarters. Jimmy Carter gave away. I'm sorry, sir. Go ahead.
Basically, what I wanted to ask is, can you explain? Look, we are living in a very uneducated America these days, and so can you explain why it's such a strategic and important location for the U.S.?
Right. Many reasons. One, location. Of course, the Panama Canal opened up in 1914, and that increased world trade dramatically, right? And so that was 1914 was an important year for other things that we'll talk about later. But so that's important. Our U.S. Navy needs to be able to get between the seas. Otherwise, we need to, if Taiwan comes under attack and you need to shift naval forces, you need that canal to get through quickly, right? That's one reason. Another reason is just the trade. A huge amount of, I can't even say how much trade goes through there now because it's dynamic. Like the Suez Canal and the Red Sea issues have caused things to change. So, the 6% or the 11% that you hear, 1 month ago changes by the next time you're able to check. And so there's that. There's also, it's just a strategic location where you can influence or even control parts of South America, Central America, and even North America. That's airstrike distance from the United States, right? And so, or missile strike distance as well. But also there's the connection with Colombia, right? So Colombia is that northernmost country in South America. Actually, Panama used to be part of Colombia. In order to make the Panama Canal, we helped Panama separate off from Colombia, right? So it became a separate country, right? And so, but now with the Darién Gap, they call it the Gap because Highway 1, the Pan American Highway, which goes from Alaska all the way through, it ends at a place called Yavitsa. And Yavitsa is where Highway 1 ends. It picks up again about 60 miles later in a place called Turbo in Colombia, right? And then from there, you can go all the way down to the tip of South America, right?
No
so
kidding.
Except for that little part, Well, I mean, you can drive all the way. And right now, Ann Vandersteel and I and others have just been down again to a bridge. They're gonna open that road. This new bridge that they're building, they're opening up a pathway to Colombia. And she just made a little video with her gimbal and her iPhone, and it went viral in Panama. And the Panamanians were shocked that they're opening a highway to Colombia, right? But we were, when I first was telling Panamanian people that last year, I went, I was down there at the Darién Gap at the edge looking at the bridge. I go down there all the time because I sensed that they were going to open it up. But there was nothing in the Panamanian news that I was able to find, or anybody was able to find. But I kept expecting they were going to open something up. So almost every time I would go to the Darién Gap, I would go to the end of the highway and look for just mud tracks or anything. And sure enough, I went down there and suddenly there's a bunch of mud. And so I followed this little thing, and I'm like, hey, here it is. They're building a bridge. Whipped out the droned it, and said, this is it. And so I went back up to Panama City. I was talking to some people in the government and whatnot, and I was like, look, who's building that bridge? Who's funding it? Nobody seems to know. They're like, there's no bridge being built there. I said, look at the mud on my boots. I was just there like 8 hours ago.
Do you have video of this?
Oh, yeah, I've got tons of video.
Can we put it up here
Absolutely.
now? All right.
Absolutely. I've got drone footage that we just made 10 days ago. I've got drone footage from last year and numerous
So what is
trips.
the significance of opening that road on that? It sounds like it's a 60-mile gap.
Yep. Oh, then you'll have an open path to South America, which means, open shot. For Panama is going to get lost. I mean, when I say lost, I mean taken. I mean, Panama is basically a country with a pork chop around its neck. And it doesn't have, it's got a very professional Senafront. Senafront is sort of their army, sort of their border patrol, sort of police. We don't have the equivalent. It's kind of all three. They're trained constantly by Navy SEALs, U.S. and also Special Forces. We just saw some of those down there again, and they've been training them for years. So they're very professional. When you go down there, I think you're going to be actually impressed with Senafront, but they're not strong enough to defend Panama, not even close, right? And they're very professional. They've got limited weapons. They don't have any rockets. They've got no anti-aircraft. They've got no anti-ship missiles. They just don't have the numbers. They're not going to be able to defend Panama. And so Panama, again, that incredibly important piece of real estate, which can be and will be open to South America by land. And by the way, there's a book written by, it was actually clearly sponsored by Chinese, and it was co-authored by a Panamanian economist. And it talks about, it's a softball book on, opening up the Darién and these sorts of things. And you can see the bioceanic corridor map and all these different maps. And these are terms people probably aren't familiar with. But the bottom line is the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, is something that'll go right through Panama. And this is vital. Actually, it ends up going right through. People were just asking me yesterday, why is Biden going to Brownsville, Texas? Because it's on the I-69 corridor. That corridor is part of the corridor that also will go through the Darién Gap, actually the bioceanic corridor and all these different things. It's all about energy. It's all about routes, Old Spice routes, Old Silk Road, all these things. Nothing has changed really. The important routes are the same. Actually, that's why I often will leave Panama and go to Netherlands, because Netherlands is another key piece of vital piece of terrain, right? You see the railway that's been built from Shanghai and other feeders in China. I've been to that end of it in Shanghai. I spent a lot of time. I spent about a year in and around China. But there's a railway now that's been completed, goes all the way across Asia and Europe, and it goes right through Netherlands to Rotterdam Harbor. Rotterdam Harbor is the biggest harbor in Europe. And just south,
man. Okay.
Yeah, and so the railway goes. So you're already filling in the blanks.
Yep.
And so it's the biggest harbor in Europe.
Major trade routes.
Yep.
They are infiltrating all the major trade routes throughout the world.
So when you see where I'm at, it's trade routes. That's where they're using this weaponized migration. They're focusing them on key places of the trade route. Brownsville. Why did Biden go there? Well, why does Governor Abbott constantly go to McAllen? It's along the I-69 corridor, which is part of these trade routes. And it goes all the way up to Detroit, where World Economic Forum also has a headquarters, right? Not a coincidence. And those feeders come up from New Orleans. So when you look at that map, you can see you can already see a lot of the place. So let's get back to Netherlands. Just south of Rotterdam Harbor is Antwerp Harbor in Belgium, the second largest harbor in Europe. You control those two bad boys, and you've got, and so now they're trying to working on something called Tri-State City in Netherlands, Germany, and Belgium. They call it Tri-State because it's the three states of Netherlands, Germany, and Belgium. Most of Netherlands, part of Germany, and part of Belgium will be this giant smart city that the World Economic Forum and CCP have envisioned. Now, every time I say this on a major show like yours, you'll see the WEF guys come out and say, that's conspiracy theory. And I'll say, well, here it is on your website, right? You know how this goes.
Yeah.
And so they want to build this giant, and they're working on it, tri-state city, smart city. And so they're really hitting Netherlands and whatnot with these weaponized migration, right? The weaponized migration is one of the tools that they're bringing to bear. Now, let's talk about trade routes and energy, right? So a lot of this...
Hold up. Before we go into trade routes and energy, let's go back to the Darién Gap. Here's the situation. You've got China, Russia, Ukraine, the border. The banks seem to be collapsing. Plus, the Chinese just negotiated with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Brazil to drop the US dollar. And most Americans, including myself, feel that we're in a recession right now. But despite all the evidence, I can't tell you what's going to happen for sure. Nobody can. Yet when it comes to your money, you should understand what's at stake. That's why I partnered with Goldco to possibly help at times like this. Go to ShawnLikesGold.com or call 855-936-GOLD to get your free gold and silver kit. The kit shows you how to defend your money with precious metals and how listeners of the show could get up to $10,000 in bonus silver. Go to ShawnLikesGold.com or call 855-936-GOLD to get your free gold and silver kit. I can't predict the future, but I can certainly prepare for it. So go to ShawnLikesGold.com or call 855-936-GOLD now. Performance may vary. Consult with your tax attorney or financial professional before making an investment decision. I want to tell you about this business venture I've been on for about the past 7-8 months, and it's finally come to fruition. I've been hell-bent on finding the cleanest functional mushroom supplement on the planet, and that all kind of stemmed from this psychedelic treatment I did. Came out of it, got a ton of benefits, haven't had a drop of alcohol in almost 2 years. I'm more in the moment with my family. And that led me down researching the benefits of just everyday functional mushrooms. And I started taking some supplements. I found some coffee replacements. I even repped a brand. And, it got to the point where I just wanted the finest ingredients available, no matter where they come from. And it got to this point where I was just going to start my own brand. And so we started going to trade shows and looking for the finest ingredients. And in doing that, I ran into this guy, maybe you've heard of him. His name's Laird Hamilton and his wife, Gabby Reese. And they have an entire line of supplements with all the finest ingredients. And we got to talking. Turns out they have the perfect functional mushroom supplement. It's actually called Performance Mushrooms. And this has everything. It's USDA organic. It's got chaga, cordyceps, lion's mane, maitake. This stuff is amazing for energy balance, for cognition. Look, just being honest, see a lot of people taking care of their bodies. I do not see a lot of people taking care of their brain. This is the product, guys. And so we got to talking, and our values seemed very aligned. We're both into the functional mushrooms. And after a lot of back and forth, I am now a shareholder in the company. I have a small amount of ownership, and I'm just really proud to be repping and be a part of the company that's making the best functional mushroom supplement on the planet. You can get this stuff at lairdsuperfoods.com. You can use the promo code SRS. That'll get you 20% off these performance mushrooms. Or
anything in the store. They got a ton of good stuff. Once again, that's lairdsuperfoods.com. Use the promo code SRS. That gets you 20% off. You guys are going to love this stuff. I guarantee it.
Today's show is brought to you by HelixSleep.com. Sleep, especially as you get older, is so critical, especially that deep, comforting sleep. Go to HelixSleep.com and take the sleep quiz. I took it, and I was matched to the Midnight Lux. I've always struggled to get a full night's sleep. After years of operating overseas, some days my back is just absolutely shot. But not anymore. I've had Helix Sleep Mattress for over a year now, and it leaves me feeling refreshed and ready for the day every day. Plus, their enhanced cooling features keep me cool all night long. Helix knows that everyone's unique, so they have several different mattress models to match based on your body type and sleep preferences. Once you match, your mattress comes right to your door, shipped for free. Helix has a 10-year warranty and even has financing options for flexible payment plans. So a great night's sleep is never far away. Helix is offering 20% off all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. Go to helixsleep.com/SRS and use the code HelixPartner20. This is their best offer yet, and it won't last long. With Helix, better sleep starts now. So we'll tie this in later. I want to keep the audience focused on what's going on down there first. So what are you seeing down there? It sounds like from our discussions in the past over the phone and from what I've been reading and since I've been following you, it sounds like you're seeing a lot of Chinese movement down there. You're seeing a lot of Russian influence down there, and you're seeing a lot of different terrorist organizations congregate down there. I have a friend, Sarah Adams, who is a CIA targeter, who is coming on here in about a month, who's going to discuss how all of these terrorist organizations, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, they're all ISIS, they're forming an alliance. Instead of hating each other, they're forming an alliance. You're saying they're congregating down there to come up into the U.S. So
Passing through. Not really congregating. They just pass through. Pass through.
Okay.
I mean, right now, when we just left, it was about 3,000 a day, right?
3,000 what?
Aliens coming through per day. And that would be mostly Venezuelans, hundreds of Chinese per day, Afghans every day, just who's who in the zoo, 150 different countries, Yemenis. And of course, IOM has an office in Yemen. We're starting to bomb Yemen, of course. Guarantee you there'll be an increased number of Yemen. Tons of Arabs. You got to keep in mind, in Venezuela, there's a lot of Hezbollah, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of, so there was a bombing in 1994 in Panama, and there was an airliner or a small flight going from Cologne to Panama City, and killed 22, I think, including 12 Jewish people, right? And then within 24 hours of that, there was a bombing in Argentina, killed 85 and wounded about 300, so about 385 casualties, right? And so those were Hezbollah. The Hezbollah mastermind in the Panama bombing is believed to live in Venezuela and owns a bar on Margarita Island, right? I mean, people know where he lives.
Yeah.
He owns a bar down there. And so, but he's still operating. And the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians have very close relationships with Venezuela. So Iranians can literally pop in there and get a new passport on arrival, not a visa, passport, right? So, and you've got also Hezbollah there in Venezuela who speak Spanish fluently because they were raised in Venezuela. There's a village in Lebanon where they speak Spanish. I think it's called Baal, right? Or I'm sorry, I've forgotten how to spell it.
I'm not familiar with that.
Yep, they speak Spanish. You can look on YouTube and you can see the people in the village literally speaking Spanish.
Interesting. Why are all of these? I definitely understand why. I mean, China's obviously there to take control of the canal, of the trade route, correct?
Yep.
Is that why Russia's there?
Russia has always an influence. They're serious players, but their influence is nothing like China. I mean, the difference is quite immense, right? And again, I've spent a year in and around China watching. I've written 3 books on Chinese information war that are only in Japanese. I didn't even publish them for an American audience. I've been trying to wake up Japanese for years because they're a vital partner for us as well. But the Chinese are doing so many things. For instance, they're interested in building a canal in Thailand on something called the Kra Isthmus. I've been down there researching that, 10 years ago. They're buying property down there. They're setting conditions to make that canal that'll allow them to bypass the Malacca Straits and that sort of thing. So a lot of this is about old, silk routes and spice routes. For instance, you see the Indo-European corridor that almost nobody has heard about, right? The Indo-European corridor is a new idea, or at least it's a new idea that people are energizing, that will go from Mumbai over to UAE, through Saudi and Jordan, and then come out through Israel and Gaza and Haifa, right? And then off to Europe, right? Interesting, huh? So they were talking about this before the attack, before these things happened on October 7th, and the Costa Rican president and the Panamanian president flew down in helicopters to one of the major camps called Las Blancas. In fact, they just made some new LZs. You can see on my drone footage before and after. They put up these helicopter LZs. They landed there. They announced that they're expanding the Darién Gap. They're expanding from 60 buses to about 200 buses. So when I come back to the United States and I say, well, I think they're going to at least triple the number of people coming through. It's not a random thought. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can do the math, from 60 to 200 buses. But in fact, we're watching infrastructure being built in the jungle, which could make it 5-10 times more. I mean, but they're they've already increased the number of buses now. But the bottom line is when I say these,
the number of buses to do what? What are the buses?
These buses for the people who emerged from the Darién Gap. I'm sorry, I missed that part. I'm down there so much I forget what people actually are not dialed in on. But so as the people, as they make it through the Darién Gap, they get on buses. They go to 2 major camps after they get out. One's called Las Blancas, and the other one's called San Vicente. San Vicente is the one I call China Camp. China Camp is the one that Mayorkas went to, Alex Mayorkas went to on April 18th, 2022. I had waited for him for 4 days. He came down in 4 Blackhawks, landed right in front of me. I didn't actually know he was going there. Somebody told me he was coming to Panama. So I went down there and I waited. I said, well, if he comes, I bet he'll land Blackhawks right here. And he did. And so when he landed, he went like this far from me, right? After he got out of the helicopter, he got, in those armored vehicles, and they went to China Camp. Now, interestingly, Alex Mayorkas used to be a board member on something called HIAS. HIAS is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, right? Now, Mayorkas himself, the Secretary of Homeland Security, he is a Cuban refugee himself of Jewish parents, right? Mother and father. And now he actually was a board member on HIAS, which is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. Now, people got angry at me and said, oh, you're becoming anti-Semite or what? Clown out. I don't care. Say whatever you're going to say. Bottom line is I've been attacking Catholic charities for years, right? But it happens to be he was a board member on HIAS. Actually, the person that dialed me in on that was Douglas McGregor. He said, he was a board member on Alexander Mayorkas was a board member on HIAS, and you can see it on the HIAS.org website. They congratulate him for getting the job at Homeland Security. So he moved over. They've got an office 40 meters from the front gate of HIAS has an office 40 meters from the front gate of China Camp. Literally, HIAS, who has a long list of donors on their website, hias.org, they're literally using Jewish money to bring people in from places like Hezbollah. You can't make up this stuff. So when I said that at a speech in Texas recently, people said, oh, you're anti-Semite. I'm like, here's the bottom line. When they start shooting up synagogues and golf courses in Florida, and there's people that came through the Darién Gap, then you'll start to wonder, how did they get through? And I'll say HIAS was one of them, right? And so shut them down. So there's a lot of heat coming on HIAS now. We were just down there again. They've taken the signs off their gate. They had a big HIAS sign on their gate. They've now taken it down. They know that they're being watched now very closely. But the bottom line is, these NGOs like HIAS, like Catholic charities like IOM, all these people, UN in general, they are taking over countries. Remember when the crazy people used to say that? Well, it turns out the crazy people were right. I used to think they were crazy. Now I just think they were smarter than I am. I mean, because they saw it. They saw this decades ago, that the UN was going to do this, and it always sounded crazy. And it's not, because they're clearly doing that to Panama. They're clearly trying to, for instance, remove the Centerfront commander and get somebody installed that is from one of the NGOs. They've already done it to the Department of Homeland Security. They've got Alex Mayorkas is the chief there, and he brought money to that camp at San Vicente. You'll see it. The before and after footage of the China camp, San Vicente camp, is phenomenal. It's a huge difference.
Do you have the before and after footage?
I'll give it to you.
Thank you.
It's downstairs.
Thank you. So China's there for a multitude of reasons. One, to control the trade route. Russia's there, it sounds like, just to have a presence. Why are so many Middle Eastern terrorist organizations passing through the Darién Gap? Why wouldn't they just fly into Tijuana or El Paso and just run through the border there? What's the draw?
Very good question. A lot of them do fly in. Same with Chinese. A lot do, actually. And then a lot, they just can't get through for whatever reason. But everybody knows you can get through. If you can get your feet anywhere in South America, you can get anywhere in the United States. It's easy at this point. It's a function of money. That's all it is. And so if you've got the money, it's easy. Follow the ant trail.
So why are they going to the Darién Gap, though? That's what I'm asking.
Because it's a route that you can get through. I mean, and again, people, let's say Chinese, they can get to Ecuador, Quito. They'll fly to Quito, Ecuador. There's whole hotels they've taken over now in Quito, right? And along the way in Colombia as well, in Nicoclí and other places, right? So they have taken over. Well, if you can get to, like, for instance, a lot of the Africans can get into Brazil. Haitians can get into Suriname and Brazil. A lot of Haitians were already in Chile due to various reasons. So a lot of people either started down there or started down there years ago, or you can just get there. For instance, Venezuela will let you in.
Okay, so you're saying that maybe some of these Middle Eastern terrorist organizations are having problem getting into just Mexico in general through some type of integration process. So it's easier for them to get in down in the Darién Gap.
That's
Is that
right.
what you're saying?
Yeah, like Venezuela will let Iranians come in.
Okay.
And so Venezuelans, I mean,
so that's basically, they're not going to the Darién, they're not coming to the Darién Gap. They're going all over South America. They're finding the easiest countries to infiltrate down there so that they can funnel up into the U.S.
Oh, they would definitely prefer to fly straight to New York. But this is the way that some people can get in. Some people, like some of the Chinese, can fly straight to Mexico because they can get a visa. And so they'll fly, a lot of them go to Cancun. And so they meet their snakeheads in Cancun. Snakehead, and we call them coyotes, but in Mandarin they call them snakeheads. So there's snakeheads in Mexico City. There's snakeheads in Tapachula. Tapachula is the southernmost city in Mexico. It's on the Guatemala border. I've been there, right? And it's like they're El Paso. And so there's snakeheads there. There's snakeheads in Cancun. So you got some Chinese that'll literally fly to Cancun and they'll go on vacation, like, chill out. And then you'll see them come across at Yuma or whatever, right? And you'll see the Chinese coming across at Yuma or San Diego or McAllen. The ones that, I've been all the way across the U.S. border from SpaceX to San Diego, much of that on the Mexican side and on the entire American side, right? And so, I'm quite familiar with that border. And I've seen a lot of Chinese come across that look like they just got off an airplane. They're wearing their cheeks aren't drawn in from going through the Darién Gap or some long trip, right? But even the Chinese, keep in mind, the Darién Gap is not the same for everybody. Some people take the hard route, right? Actually, right now, Oscar Blue is out there with Matt Tomlin. They're going in. They literally landed by helicopter yesterday. They're okay with me saying this because by the time this airs, they'll be out. They're right by the Colombian border right now. They're actually reconning one of the new routes that the Chinese are using. I can say that now. I'm saying this with permission because, again, by the time this airs, they're out. But in fact, I'm tracking their icons I was just looking at earlier before we went on. They're deep in the jungle. It's a new route. But there's hard routes and there's easy routes. The hard route is like you go from Nicocli, Colombia, which I've done this. You get on a boat, you go to Capargana, or that's one of the main places, Capargana, and then you enter the Darién Gap there, which I've done. I didn't go very far in, but we went in there. I went there with Chuck Holton and Masako Ganaha. We didn't go very far, but we went in enough to see the entrance, right? And then we came around and went to the Panama side. But that's the hard route. It goes over what's called the Mountain of Death and the Four Crossings and all this. That's where you take the high casualties, right? Then there's easier routes that the Chinese and many Syrians as well, and others, and Afghans as well, actually. They'll take an easier, many of the Afghans take the hard route, but others have a lot of money somehow, and they take the easy route. And so you get on these boats and you go to places like Querétaro and you go to places like Anachucana. I've been to all these places. That's with the Kuna Indians. You land, and then they only have about 2 days to go through the jungle, and it's easy. The Indians carry your bags. Nobody gets raped or killed on that route because they pay so much money. So those routes are quite safe. Although when Ann Vandersteel and I were just down there on this last trip, that route was closed temporarily because a couple of boats capsized and 9 Afghans were killed. So the route was that route was temporarily closed because the seas were so high. But when it's closed, it doesn't stop people from coming. They either just wait or they take one of the other routes.
Okay. How are you received down there? What do you have a cover, or are you just?
Everybody knows who I am.
Everybody knows.
Everybody knows who I am. I'm out with the Indians all the time. I'm out with Imbra Indians, Wunan Indians a little bit, and Kuna Indians. They all know me by. In fact, again this morning I got a message from while we were together. I got a message from one of the Kuna Indian, Imbra Indian mayor, Francisco Agapi. He's the mayor of 29 villages of Imbra, Wunan, and that what they call comarca, which is a reservation. So most of the villages that the aliens come through are his villages, right? So we've actually had him up in Washington. Todd Bensman had helped get him up there, and we had him talking with congressmen and whatnot, and so we've had him to the United. He speaks English fluently. He actually went to school in Oregon, in that crazy place. And then actually went back to Darién Gap where it was safe. You can't make up this stuff. Everybody's talking about how dangerous Darién is, but he would rather be back in Darién than actually in Oregon.
Interesting. I've actually heard that the Darién Gap is one of the most dangerous places on the planet.
It's dangerous if you're crossing. It's dangerous if people don't want you there. Those Indians can't. I mean, the Indians I'm out with all the time. There's a lot of firefights out there. There's the Senate fronts out there, getting into contact all the time. But that's on the routes where they pay less money. Now, when there's so many people coming in, like 3,000 a day, the aliens coming in reach predator saturation, right? So there's more people coming in than the predators have a chance to do anything about it. So most of the people end up getting through without getting raped or robbed when you're coming through thousands at a time because there's just not enough robbers and rapists, right?
This bridge that they're building, how big is this bridge? How many lanes?
I don't know yet.
How much construction is being built on it? I mean, is this like equivalent to the amount of infrastructure that China's putting into Africa, building 4 8-lane highways?
You'll be able to get tanks over it. I mean, because one thing that I was waiting for was for them to start putting the abutments in so I could photograph them and send them back to some engineers, which I've done.
Is China building the road?
Nobody says who's putting the money in it. So it indicates to me it's China because China has a way of doing this, right? So when I keep asking government people, who's actually paying for this? Nobody seems to know.
Nobody knows who's paying for the bridge.
I'm sure somebody knows, but they're not coming off with it.
How active are they? How active is the construction? Oh,
very active. I mean, it's like everybody's. I mean, I literally was just down there and making video over the shoulder of the construction foreman, looking at the blueprints. They were literally they let us. It's Panama. They let you just look over the shoulder.
Does this look similar to here in the U.S. if somebody's building an overpass? Or
they work harder down in Panama.
You know what I'm saying, though? Is there excavators, concrete trucks, tons of construction workers?
They're digging. They're actively building it. They're building at least 2 bridges, possibly 3.
So it's a major project.
Oh, yeah.
This isn't like some sticks.
No. The
it's not
Styx
a
project.
It's not a river
happened
and stream
nearby.
crossing.
There are some of those, but those. Let me tell you how those work. And when you come down, you're going to see it. Okay, this is one that you'll be able to drive tanks over. You'll see the abutments. I'll give you the photos and whatnot, or just bring it and show you. But this is one this is for very heavy stuff. But when we asked the people building the bridge, the foreman, he's like, "Oh, it's for yucca, the food." You're like, yucca? It's like, yeah, like a, T-72 yucca. I don't know. So I'm just like, I don't know. But, whatever. It's clearly going to be big enough for tanks. I'm not saying that that's what they're going to use. I'm just saying it's going to be big enough to take those trees out of the jungle. Because those trees in the Darién Gap are probably worth billions of dollars. So let's get to that. Now, the Chinese, every year, they rebuild a lot of these small, like sort of Styx bridges because they're constantly cutting the trees down, even in rainy season. And then when the rainy season comes, it blows out all these little bridges, right? And so the Chinese come and they rebuild the bridges every year, and that's part of how they get the trees from the Indians, because the Indians want the bridges open, right? So and then the Indians sell the trees for $20 each, except for the coca-cola trees, which are like $2,000 per ton, right? But there's trees out there that are probably worth $1 million each, like the black ebony trees and whatnot. But keep in mind, trees are like drugs, right? And they are worth a lot more upstream, right? In other words, if you have a really high quality, some of these trees that they have out there, when you make chess pieces out of it and sell those things, this thing's worth a lot of money. It's like ivory, right? It's like drugs. Now, to the Indians, they're like, yeah, we got all these trees, millions and millions of trees, $20. Or for the more expensive ones, the coca-cola, $2,000 per ton. But again, downrange, once you get these things out on the ships where they make stuff out of them, or back to China or to the Middle East where people can use these things for furniture, those trees are worth a lot of money. So keep that in mind as you're building this highway through the Darién Gap. You're also building access to more of the trees. I've got somebody going down there today, actually finding the head of one of the trails where they're doing more logging this year. The dry season is just
How long have you said you've been going down there?
I started immediately after Biden was installed. When Biden,
about 3 years.
Yep, I was in Washington for the inauguration, and you saw how quickly they put up those trees, right? I'm not the trees. How quickly they put up those fences, right? So immediately, Chuck Holton and Masako Ganaha and I flew right to El Paso because we thought that they would start flooding over the border and from Mexico to El Paso, and they were. And the Border Patrol's like, wow, he's only been in office for 48 hours, and we're getting overwhelmed. And we were seeing it, right? And then we flew down to Colombia, and we went to the Darién Gap on the Colombian side. And then I started going to Panama constantly because I'm like, this is it. This is where they're going to run right up the middle. It's going to be, so I started spending a lot of time there developing networks and situational awareness, figuring this out. Where are they going to build? Are they going to build a bridge here? Yeah, I thought they would. That's why I'm constantly reconning for the bridge, and they just started the bridge now. And not just a bridge, but a pathway to Colombia, right?
So where I'm going with this is, how much have you seen the infrastructure develop down there, especially when it comes to the Chinese side?
Oh, it must.
In 3 years.
Okay. Now, for just the Darién Gap, it's got to be, based on what we saw in the last 2 weeks, I would say 5 times more.
What did you see when you first started going there?
When I first started going there, I went to a place called Bajo Chiquito, right? And keep in mind, it was not very open. I had to do the normal, make friends with the Indians and that sort of thing. I found the chief, Francisco, got to know him, and he's like, well, you should come to Bajo Chiquito. So it's just me. I'm out with the Indians all the time. So mostly for those about 6 months I've spent down there, it's been mostly me alone, basically setting conditions to bring people down. So you see all these journalists down there now like Ben Berkwam and Oscar Blue and Epoch Times and Brett Weinstein. It was me setting the runway to bring them all down. So So what did I see back then? I saw Bajo Chiquito, this village about 3 hours by dugout canoe up into the Darién Gap, was just like overrun. There's 403 people in that village at that time, according to their census, of Embra Indians, and sometimes there would be, at least equal that number of aliens or double, right? crap everywhere. I mean, feces everywhere, like terrible. No water supplies. I mean, literally at that point, I went out with Chuck Holton a couple of times when he would come down with me, and I said, "What do you think the fatality rate is of people coming through on this route?" And I didn't want to load the answer, and he said, "No, maybe 10%." That's what I had written down. I said, I don't know, 7, 12, something. I was like, because that's based on talking with just so many people coming through, how many bodies they were seeing, how many rapes and murders they were seeing, how many people were falling off the mountain of death or drowning, washing down the river, wrapped up in their tents. And that, a lot of these people have never been by any rivers. They come from cities. They don't know what a flash flood is. That's a rainforest, right? And it's in the mountains. You cross the Continental Divide. When you come through the mountain of death, out in the Darién Gap is the Continental Divide, right? Okay. So you're crossing the Continental Divide, and they sleep. The easiest places to sleep are by the rivers. You know how this plays out. You're a Navy SEAL. It doesn't play out well in a rainforest, right? So you end up one group that was coming through, it was 40 people, and 20 died, 50%.
What does the infrastructure look like now? So it sounds like
now, for instance, the Indians, they used to have 15 horsepower engines. Now most of them have 30. By the way, every boat that I've ever seen in the jungle is all piraguas, not a shred of fiberglass. A piragua is a dugout canoe. They literally chop down a sizable enough tree. It takes them, like a month, and they hollow that thing out. And then they literally make it usually right where it lands, the first part of it anyway, and then they put an engine on them. And if you look at the old, I found an old painting from about, 160, 70 years ago, and it's got a piragua out in the jungle in Panama. They look exactly the same, except now they have a motor, right? And so one of the ways that the infrastructure has increased is just going from 15 horsepower engines to 30, which is a big deal. Sometimes the people can do 2 trips a day with those instead of 1, right? So I mean, there's all these little things that are incremental. There's a lot more piraguas now than there were before. There's they have the NGOs have made water facilities there. Right now they're building 2 new camps out, or actually 3 in the jungle that we know of. One is at Bajo Chiquito Village. We were just at it 10 days ago. There's another near Bajo Chiquito Village, which is going to, be big enough for maybe 15,000 people per day, right? It's quite large. And I'll give you that drone footage and footage from the ground. And then on a completely different river, that's called the Rio Turquesa. On a completely different river, the Rio Membrillo, that we call that the China route, they're building another new camp out there as well. I mean, you're going to be able to, I would say, at least increase by 5 times.
So this started out as camps with almost no infrastructure, no sewage, no running water, none of that. And now the infrastructure is camps that hold thousands of people.
Yeah, but they're more pass-through.
What's going on inside these camps?
Oh, well, they limp in from out of the jungle, except for the Chinese route, and they come in smiling a lot of times out of that route, and because it's an easier route, and you should see some of the videos. I'll give them to you where it's like a vacation video for Chinese. It's like, here we are getting on the boat at Nicoclí. Here we are with the friendly Indians and getting in a horse. They actually have horses carry some of their stuff on the easy route. But what's it like on the Bajo Chiquito? Now, the rivers are their sewers, right? So they don't really have toilets per se. They did just put in some outhouses, which stink terribly, but in reality, they mostly use the river, right? Mm-hmm. So almost everybody just defecates in the rivers.
Reason I'm asking is I want to know what the growth is like with the interest in the Darién Gap. That's what I'm getting at.
The growth
of the infrastructure in the 3 years that you've been going down.
I would say at least 5 times bigger or more. Let's not just talk bigger, but also there is faster. So it's more efficient. As an example, in the past, when you would come through Bajo Chiquito, often you might be stuck there for a week, right? Or even 2 weeks. I mean, I would be out there and people would be like, yeah, I've been waiting for a boat for 12 days or whatever, and they're like, I want to get on. There wasn't enough piraguas. Now there are, right? Mm-hmm. So when you come out of the jungle, you sign in, and a lot of people don't even have IDs. Nobody knows who they are. They lost them in the jungle, or they didn't bring them to begin with, right? And so now you get on a piragua, the dugout canoe, you go about 3 hours. So you can literally come out of the jungle and get on a piragua that day if you get the timing right. But if not, you spend the night and you go the next morning, right? So it used to be you might be stuck there for a week or more. But now you come out of the jungle, check in, go bathe in the river, get on a piragua. Even if it's the next morning, now you go to Las Blancas camp. Las Blancas camp is the next camp. Again, you used to be stuck there for a week, 2 weeks. Now you get out of the piragua, you can get on that bus. So it's more of a bus station than a camp now. The only people that get stuck there now are people that don't have money for the bus. And they'll keep them there. It's $60 now for the bus from Las Blancas up to inside Costa Rica.
So these are just basically holding camps.
Holding just long enough to get on the bus. And so in reality, for a lot of people, we still call them camps, but in reality, to be accurate on the words, we should really start calling them bus stations / camps. It's camp for some people or overnight place for depending on what time of the day you come and what time. But in reality, the buses are running 24/7. You can get out the same day, and you probably will. Once you get out, it's just so much faster now. It used to take, if you got to Colombia, let's say you fly to Bogota. Like there's people that fly from Istanbul to Bogota every day. And then from Bogota, it's a bus ride up to Nicoclí. You get on the boat, you go over. Next thing you know, you're at one of these camps like Bajo Chiquito or Las Blancas. It could take you a month easily to get to the United States, easily take you a month. Now, we tracked one guy from Colombia to Brooklyn. It took him about 10 days. And he had a driver's license. He was Chinese, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, he literally went there and had a driver's license because a lot of the Chinese are coming into their own ecosystem. Like a lot of the people are coming in like Planet of the Apes, pell-mell. They've got no organization. Not the Chinese, man. Chinese have an ecosystem within the ecosystem. They come in their own pipelines. Many of the Chinese are coming up. They're growing marijuana in Maine. You can see lots of articles about it now. They're growing marijuana in Oklahoma and Oregon and California, all over the place. They're growing huge amounts of marijuana. They're smuggling fentanyl.
So hold on. I know about this. So are you saying that the Chinese are sending their people down to South America? They're going through the Darién Gap, up Central America, and that's how they're infiltrating into the U.S.?
Huge numbers.
Do they really need to do that? Or, can they just fly right into the U.S.?
Oh, a lot fly, and others go through Canada. So some are actually going to Mexico and taking a boat and going to Canada.
So do you know what differentiates, like, if you're a Chinese national coming to the U.S. to do harm, how do you know whether you're going to go direct to the U.S., go to South America, and up through the Darién Gap, or south in from Canada?
I don't know how they make their determinations, but they do somehow. Some do. If they can fly straight to Mexico, they'll do that. They've told us that many times. Mm-hmm. The people that can't fly straight to Mexico, they have to find another way to get in. Some people come in on student visas. They would rather not go through the Darién Gap, but other people, almost all the Chinese can get through Quito, but a lot of them have brand new passports. Mm-hmm. How are you getting brand new Chinese passports? You can see that if you look online, you'll see the Chinese consulate in Mandarin. What was about a year and a half ago or so? They were saying Chinese nationals can come and get new passports if they've lost their passports through irregular means, right? Mm. So literally, the Chinese government is openly supporting them to get new because if you go to the Mexican side. In some places, there are burn barrels on the Mexican side. Chinese are throwing their documents in, right? A lot of the other people just throw them on the ground. The Chinese, they have OPSEC, man. They have document security and everything. They pay attention to details. They have their own networks, right? So the Chinese, what are they doing? Many are coming for this reason or that reason. I don't know what all they're coming for, but they're clearly mostly military-age males, right?
See, when you say military-age male, that makes me think that you believe they're coming here to invade in a fight. Is that what you're saying?
I think it's pretty obvious. And I think if you come down with your background, I'm not going to need to say a word. I'm just going to need to take the horse to water and be quiet and let you watch.
Do you think that's how China...
You tell me what you think.
Do you think that's what their plan is?
Straight up.
It's going to be...
They don't hide it. They hide it. They don't hide it at all. There's a book, Unrestricted Warfare, which you've probably read. Some of them actually say it. Most of them will not. But okay, here's one example. A guy named this was about a year. This was last year, 2023. So there's this one place that I wait where they often come out in the dry season and they emerge at nighttime. And as you know, the best time to get people to talk is at nighttime when they're alone, right? So there's this one place I'll wait for them to come walking out of the jungle, and they come out, and it's on the way to the China camp. So they're all walking by, and I'll say ni hao, that sort of thing. Well, that night, Masako Ganaha actually approached one, as did a couple of other people I was with, and they're making video, and this one guy got quite angry, right? And he's like, and some of this is on video and audio, right? And he's, like, turn that off. And one of the guys I was with, unfortunately, said, "You're a spy." He just like blurted, he's a young guy. Anyway, but the next thing you know, we're sitting at this table with this guy for an hour and a half, right? His name's Lushan Zhao. He's itching, he's scratching. He just came through Canam Membrillo. And Canam Membrillo is the village deep in the jungle that's where most of the Chinese come through. Most of the Chinese don't go throh Bajo Chiquito. They go through the different, easier route at Canam Membrillo. And so it's called Canam Village. It's on the Membrillo River, right? And so in Canam Membrillo, there are these bugs that the Imbra call morongoy. I hate those things. I've never seen them anywhere else in the world. They eat you alive, man. We should napalm that village. I used to joke with the Imbra Indians, we're going to come back and napalm this. Why do you live here? These bugs, they're terrible. But he came out of the jungle and he's itching and he's scratching and he was in that emotional state, right? And he actually had a poncho on. And so anyway, we get him at the table, get him calmed down. He was very angry. And as you know, if you can get him calmed down from that emotional state, he just kept rambling for an hour and a half. And he goes, I went to the Bahamas. I bought a boat from a Scotsman for $5,000 in Nassau, right? And as you know, there's a giant Chinese embassy in Bahamas. It's a huge embassy, right? They're clearly using Bahamas. We got people from China coming up on the Florida shores at Jupiter Beach and Miami and everywhere else every single day, right? And he said he bought a boat. He ran out of fuel. He was with his father, and he said he was adrift. His English was very good. I'm guessing he went to Luoyang, which you may have heard of that. That's where they do their spy school, right? Mm-hmm. I'm guessing he was MSS, Ministry of State Security, their CIA. I'm just guessing. I don't know. But he was very good in English. His body language was good. He was like, "Hey, man," he was using vernacular. And, but he was a little off. He wasn't perfect yet. But he was heading to Florida. So he said he was adrift at sea. And he said the U.S. Coast Guard picked him up, right? And he somehow got deported back to the Bahamas. Now, I was able to confirm the Coast Guard definitely picked him up. That was a fact, right? So he was somehow deported back to the Bahamas. They were deporting him to China, connected in Cuba. This is what he told us. And he then changed his flight and went to Quito, Ecuador, because Chinese can get through Quito. Then he took the China route, and we intercepted him as he came out of the jungle. Gotcha. And he went on for a long time. So we got more information about him. I got his phone number. We were able to track back a lot of stuff, including what appears to be a military ID that we got later, not through him, through other methods. And he appears to actually have been an officer in something. And bottom line is, I'm guessing MSS, and that's what some others guess, but I don't know.
Interesting. So let's go back to the fighting age males. we're really in the weeds on all this stuff right now. I want to lift it up to about a 30,000 foot view. What are they doing? What's the plan?
I think, for instance, okay, let's rewind a little bit to the plan. Keep in mind, I have written 3 books on Chinese information where I'm kind of dialed in on this. I've been to Tibet, where they were kind of moved in and just took it. Some of it was kinetic, but mostly it was demographic, right? I was in Hong Kong for 7 months until they kicked me out during the last spasm from 2019 to 20, right? And so how did they take Tibet? Mostly demographic warfare. Han Chinese moving in and supplanting the Tibetans who moved off to northern India. I've been up to northern India talking with them. A lot of Tibetans are in Hong Kong or they're in Oregon and California, right? They're all over the place with their prayer flags, but they're gone. Tibet is gone, essentially, right? How did they take Hong Kong? They took Hong Kong, again, they were just bringing in like 100 to 150 Han Chinese per day. They were taking over key positions like professors, preachers, actually literal preachers, politicians, of course, all policemen, all the P's, and and just slowly taking over the cockpit. And so they mostly did it demographically. They set conditions. As you know, with your background, you know all about setting conditions. This isn't about sparks and all that. This is about setting conditions. And Chinese are very patient about setting conditions. So they slowly just bring in the demographic waves, just enough, not enough that everybody rises up and goes crazy, but you fill the bathtub, right? And so that's what they did in Tibet. That's what they did in Hong Kong. That's what they're doing. I was just down in Honduras, and I was in a place called Roatan. I was talking with a very interesting guy there, and I asked him, do you know anybody in the Honduran government that's in Roatan's an island in Honduras, right? And I said, do you know anybody who has been invited, somebody from the top levels of the Honduran government, military, whatever, who's been invited to China? And he said, actually, a friend of mine. So, who happened to be the top general in the Honduran military. In fact, he was like their chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So I said, oh, is he here? Can we invite him, right? He goes, no, he lives on the mainland near Tegucigalpa. I said, well, can you call him up and ask him to dinner tomorrow night? So we flew him in. The next night, we had dinner with him for 3 or 4 hours, right? And he talked about how he was invited to China because his grandfather came into Honduras, the Chinese, in like 1923, right? And so these are called what they call overseas Chinese, right? So I'm going somewhere very important with this. They'll find these overseas Chinese. I had Masako Ganaha sitting beside me, that Japanese journalist who's always Johnny on the spot. And she was, we'd talked about this quite a lot. They always invite you over. They'll have a parade for you. They'll show you the graves of your family and that sort of thing. He's like, oh, they invited me over. They had a parade for me. They showed me the graves of my family. That's what they do, right? And it's what they do. Everywhere I go, that's what they do. And they get you he said he's been to China, I think 7 times at this point. So those are what they call overseas Chinese. Now, there's a different type of recruitment. There's numerous different types. Another type is more archaeological and anthropological. For instance, we knew that there was an archaeological dig going on in Honduras. So that's why we flew to Honduras, because the Chinese are doing an archaeological dig there, and they're trying to persuade the Mayan Indians that they came over on the land bridge and they're actually Chinese. And all these bad white people came and took your land, the Spanish, wherever, the Germans, whoever, took your land, right? But we're all brothers and sisters, we're cousins, whatever, but we're all family, and we're going to take this stuff back. So interestingly, that Honduran general, we were talking about this in detail. He goes, their plan is not to attack you and take over the world. Their plan is to become the world. They're going to become this demographically. They're going to just slowly, that's what I saw in Tibet. That's what I see in parts of Thailand, the place where they want to build the Kra Isthmus Canal. Chinese are moving down there, right? I'm seeing this everywhere I go. I'm watching it in Panama. I'm watching it. It's happening in Honduras. It's happening in Guatemala. I was up in Guatemala looking at the same thing, right? And of course, the Guatemalans don't have quite the relationship with they don't have that relationship yet. Guatemala still has a tight relationship with Taiwan, right? As does Belize. In fact, Masako Ganaha had an interview with the Taiwanese ambassador in Belize a few months ago, and I was there. And we were talking about these sorts of things. And you can see China is slowly taking all the pawns, all the little squares off the board so that Taiwan has no diplomatic cover anywhere, whether it's Haiti or Belize or Guatemala. They've already taken, Panama from them and almost everybody else. Why is this even important? As soon as there's no countries at all that recognize Taiwan, that's it. You're closed down. You can't even travel, as a sovereign country anymore. You're not going to, because right now they have the international cover because you are recognized by some people, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, this is coming. It's coming hard for Taiwan.
Interesting. I did not piece that one together.
Yeah. So they're slowly, Belize and Guatemala are important for various reasons. Those are the 2 countries that border Mexico on the south, right? And, another thing, by the way, a lot of these people that are coming through the Darién Gap, they say, they're from Nepal and places like that, and India. I spent a year in India. I spent a year in Nepal. I spent a year in and around China. Why are all these Chinese coming through that are like, I'm fleeing persecution, and yet they still have such diplomatic cover from the United States? Why is a country that we allow people in because they claim that their country is persecuting them or even prosecuting them, And yet we still treat, China like they're our best buddies, in trade and whatnot, right?
I can answer that.
Yeah, we know the answer.
It's called elite capture. Do you
Exactly
know who
what
Peter
it is.
Schweitzer is?
What's that?
You guys got to meet. Do you know Peter Schweitzer?
I don't know him personally.
You gotta
But it's
meet
totally elite capture. They're like that Honduran general I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
So there's that. There's the elite capture in that way. There's elite capture for people that are not Chinese of descent at all, and then there's the overseas Chinese. You can see films now in the United States. I read a book about 3 years ago, I guess, about building the transcontinental railway in the United States, and the book was written by a Gordon Chang. And I messaged to Gordon Chang. I was with Gordon Chang, the Fox commentator. I was with him in Hong Kong and whatnot, and so I said, "Oh, this is a great book, Gordon." I was surprised. I didn't know you wrote this. He goes, "Oh, that's the other Gordon Chang." So I was like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting," because the book was all about basically how the Chinese were so important in building the transcontinental railway. Now, I'm going somewhere with this. You can find, if you go on YouTube, you can find a video where this Chinese forest ranger at Yellowstone is saying, well, the Chinese built the road here. They're basically setting the conditions in the Chinese minds that America's ours. All the people that came through on the Bering Straits, they're saying that's ours. All the Navajo, all the everybody, all the Indians, whether it's Embera, Kuna, Apache, it doesn't matter. They're saying they are old descendants of Chinese, and this is our land. From the top of Alaska all the way down to the tip of South America, all the Americas are Chinese. And you see them moving in everywhere, becoming these places, right? Slowly supplanting the local people, brainwashing them. We were just in El Salvador, in San Salvador, right? I always go to libraries. I always go to museums. I've been to museums all over the world, Malaysia, Indonesia, long list. I'm looking for clues on the information. Always watch your enemy's information game, right?
I mean, it's pretty public now. I mean,
Yeah.
You saw what they just threw a huge ceremonial parade in California when Xi Jinping came. You saw that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was publishing way in advance that they're going to make San Francisco their capital in the United States. I've published this many times. I said, and that's why I go to San Francisco sometimes. I know that's where they're going to do it.
On top of that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I just read an article the other day that California just elected its first non-citizen government official who happens to be Chinese.
Yeah,
Have you seen that?
No, but you see these Chinese police stations all over the world. Like we've been to one in Dublin and London, and they're in the United States. They're everywhere, right?
Yeah. What do they say? Once it hits 40% of the population, that it turns. They make their own laws, make their own rules.
It'll be less than 40 with those guys.
Is it?
Because the Chinese Communist Party demands allegiance with anybody with Chinese genes, right? Again, let me go back to something I was going to say, and then I'll go into this. I could literally go on, I could teach a university course on this. I've written 3 books on it, right? I mean, we were just up in San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador, right? It's a safe place. I recommend people go there on vacation. But one thing that's quite interesting, though, is all these people from these places they say are war-torn or impoverished, they're passing by Starbucks. We were in San Salvador. There was a Starbucks on one side of the street and on the other side of the street. I'm like, so all these impoverished people are going through all these countries that Americans moved to, right? Americans moved to Panama and Costa Rica, and a lot of them actually moved to Honduras, believe it or not. And now people are moving to El Salvador, but they're all passing through all these places, right? But anyway, let me tell you about the library. I was going to mention, I always go to libraries, museums, archaeological digs, because this is where you can pick up the trailhead on information war, right? And so in El Salvador, in San Salvador, there's a new library. It's not quite finished, but you can get into it. It's 7 floors, right? And so we waited in line for about 45 minutes. There's a Chinese Communist Party flag, CCP flag, waving right out front. I mean, it's right at the top, right next to the El Salvador flag, right? And we went in there, and it's 7 floors. And I kept asking, where's the section on like physics and engineering and time management, MBA stuff, you know what I mean? History. And, finally we get to about the sixth floor. But mostly it's just video games and that sort of thing. And so you have to get what's called a key to knowledge. That's the library card. So if you want to if you want to play the video games, like they have all these video games like Batman and Game of Thrones and all this child stuff, right? But if you want to play the video games, you have to read a book for 30 minutes. And then they'll credit your key to knowledge, and then you can go play the video games for an hour. As you can imagine, whatever book they put in your hand, and they say you have to take some little test on the book, and it's library warfare. I call that library warfare. There's a museum warfare, archaeological warfare. I just call it these things because there's no name for it. And I see it all over the world. They'll come in and they'll say, like the archaeologists that are now in Honduras, and they'll say, hey, well, look at these pots and potteries. This is what was made. When I was in Tibet,
This is what was made what?
Back in China.
So what is the archaeological warfare? Oh,
they try to persuade you that here's how it works. They'll come in and they'll, dig some stuff up and say, well, this is actually, from so-and-so back, and this is from this era in China. And actually you are part of us. And they, have these genetic tests, and then they start bringing them in. Like, you're actually our cousins. You helped build the Great Wall of China. You did all these great things, and da-da-da-da-da. And then and then you came across, you fought your way down, and survived like, basically good Chinese. And then these Spanish people and conquistadors and whatnot came and took it away from you, right? This is our land. We were the first ones here, right? That's how they roll. And
what was the other one? You had the library, archaeological, and what was the other one? There was 3.
Museum.
Museum.
Yeah, and statues as well. So what they'll do is, let's say with statues, because this works the same way as the archaeological. Like statues, they'll put up a statue somewhere, like say a Comfort Women statue in Glendale, California. Now the Koreans are running that, but I've been there quite a lot. But they'll come and they'll put up a statue, and they'll get a lot of press around the statue, right? There'll be a website for it. They'll raise money for it. They'll start bringing journalists there. Like if you go to Jeju Island down in South Korea, there's a big island off of South Korea called Jeju Island. They got these big museums there. I've looked at them. They bring in entire plane loads of journalists come in, get them all soused up, drunk, and take them and show them the museums. And I've watched them do that. It's just amazing. They literally will invite a bunch of, all inclusive, come on down from Seoul, or come in from Japan, come from Los Angeles, come and see, come and visit, Korea. And so now they've got all the journalists, and they take them to the museums, and the next thing you know, their articles come out. And you know how this goes. Mm-hmm. It's the mockingbird thing, right? Or I call it caw crows, right? And all the journalists are like caw. One goes caw. Basically shit. Yeah. Everybody's they're like flies that eat each other's vomit, right? As one sergeant major in Iraq said, these journalists are like flies. They all eat each other's vomit. There's a lot of truth to that.
So let's move to Maine now. You were starting to talk about how Maine is being taken over by Chinese marijuana farmers. What is going on there?
Yeah, well, you can look it up, and there's a lot of articles coming out now, and U.S. authorities, I think, have reported nationally they may have captured 700,000 pounds of marijuana last year from I could be wrong on that. I should be careful. But they've captured a lot of marijuana from Chinese last year, right?
What do you mean? It's legal up there.
Yeah, but I don't know let me be careful. I'm gonna run quiet on this. But the bottom line is there's a lot of problems with the Chinese, right? And so and it's increasing. Like they're growing marijuana everywhere, right? Now it's a cash crop, of course, so you can run your war on this. Look at the opium in Afghanistan, right? I wrote a series of dispatches, I think it was 2 or 3 in 2006 in Afghanistan called The Perfect Evil, right? And it was all, and if you read my 2006 dispatches from Afghanistan, I left Iraq, I went to Afghanistan, and I would go back and forth between those 2 wars. But as soon as I stepped foot in Afghanistan in 2006, back when everybody thought we won the war, it was clear that we hadn't won the war. And I published those articles called The Perfect Evil, where they're using using the opium money to run the war, right? It's an old formula, right? Actually, when you talk to the Afghan farmers, I spent 2 years in Afghanistan. I spent a year alone, and I spent a year with U.S., British, and Lithuanian and other forces, right? So the year that I was alone, I never got shot at, by the way, when I was alone. Everybody would say, you're crazy. And I'm like, guess what? The only time I get shot at is when I'm with you. I've never been shot at alone, not even once, and so who's crazy? I mean, I'm with you and the vehicles are on fire upside down, and so, but I'm alone out with these people and I'm going to their farms and they're just farmers. And you talk with them and they're like, we would rather be growing grapes. We would rather be growing pomegranates. Well, why aren't you growing pomegranates? I'd always ask them the same questions. There are specific reasons for it. Back during the Russian war, they destroyed many of the Kerez systems. The Kerez systems are the underground water systems. They're aqueducts, sort of, not aqueducts, but they're underground. They're very difficult to build. It's very sophisticated, right? So if you're flying over Afghanistan, they're on the ground. It's easier when you're flying over. You see those little ant hills, right? They look like ant hills. They're like, the single whole ant hill that has like a crater. Those, you'll see them, they're lined. Those are along and they'll come from like a draw in a mountain, right? Or a valley, because that's where the water collects. They will build those. They can be 50 miles long, right? And when the holes are closer and closer together, that means the underground river is more and more shallow, right? So those Kerez systems, though, they can go miles, right? And that's why you see a lot of these villages way out in the middle of the desert and there's no river around. Because they got a Kerez system, which could have taken literally a century to build, right? And so they'll have, they'll get the first village, and then over time, it just gets longer and longer, right? Mm-hmm. So the Soviets came in. You can use these Kerez systems to store weapons or to, travel 4 miles and go shoot somebody and then go back into your hole. So I found this Soviet manual, and it was showing how to, destroy Kerezes. They're easy to detect. I mean, they're really obvious, right? And actually, some of the Afghans use them as air conditioners. They have the house built right on top of it. The thing air conditions their house. Their houses are more they're more comfortable than a house in Florida, right? I mean, you can't make up this stuff. They know how to live out there. But so the Soviets came in and they were blowing up these things, and they were because if you blow up that Kerez system, you're actually destroying a lot of their pomegranates and that sort of thing. And often they would also cut down their pomegranates. They would cut down their vineyards and whatnot. And so then they started growing opium. They started growing opium because it uses, I think, 1/3 of the water, if I'm accurate. The DEA guys would be able to fact check me on that. I think it's about 1/3. They're much more hardy. It's also a cash crop, right? Now, if you're growing grapes, they make more money on grapes, which they turn into raisins usually. Their grapes in Afghanistan are unbelievably good. But with let's say if you grow tomatoes, you have to pick the tomato, sell the tomato, right? And it's worth that much, right? But if you grow opium, which is harder, they don't like to do it, and they don't make as much money. Actually, the farmers don't make as much money. But now you've already cut down their pomegranate trees, you've cut down their vineyards, you've messed up their Kerez systems, right? And so they start growing opium. And so, and also with the opium, the value density, this much opium, that's worth a lot of money. This much tomatoes or grapes is, not worth as much. And but it's worth more to them locally. But as you know, on the value chain, as you sell that opium up the chain and it ends up on the streets of London, a lot of people make a lot more money on it. It can fund the war, blah, 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 right? So that's why they do the opium. That's why I wrote that series of dispatches called The Perfect Evil, because even, as you know, the more of these drugs like fentanyl that you flood on the streets, the more people want it creates its own demand. It's a perfect evil. And then you use that to fund the war. You literally destroy the people while you're funding the war. And that's why I keep mentioning the people that are pushing marijuana and whatnot out there, they're literally doing the job for the Chinese. Right? They're literally like helping them fund the war against us. They're literally thousands of Americans are dying every month from fentanyl poisoning. Mm-hmm. And the Chinese are doing that. Jason Jones is a good guy to talk with about this. Jason Jones is quite dialed in on this, actually. I don't know if you know Jason.
Oh, we've covered this portion extensively on this show several times where we talk about how China's bringing in chemists to teach the cartels how to make the world's deadliest fentanyl. They're sending in the supplies. They've built the infrastructure.
they will you know this better than anybody. I don't need to tell you, but some of those other guys don't quite get it, right? And we got the weaponized migration, which will kill us in and of itself, regardless of all the other stuff. That will kill the United States. That's a kill shot, right? We've got the chemical warfare. We got the economic side, which is quite serious, right? We've got, they can cut off our electricity. We've all talked about that a lot. We're obviously quite vulnerable on a lot of different fronts, not to mention these smart cities. The fascist state, which we clearly have now, is growing. And again, go back to Netherlands. They're clearly using the weaponized migration. You see Soros, by the way, before he was Mr. Open Borders, was Mr. All drugs should be legalized. It's not a coincidence, right?
Yeah.
This is literally weakening our base so that we can be attacked, right? Also, the drugs and whatnot make you much more vulnerable to information, to brainwashing, right? Like, for instance, you look at 1984, Soma, right? You read the book Rape of the Mind from 1956 from a Dutch psychologist named Joost Meerlo, right? He talks about that. If you see what happened during the pandemic lockdowns, couldn't go to church, couldn't go to weddings, couldn't go to funerals, couldn't get with your families, but you can go get all the alcohol you want. You can smoke dope all you want, because that makes you more vulnerable to the message, right? If you're going to train animals, if you're going to train people, you want to separate them from their power base.
Yeah. Let's, Michael, let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to start diving into, you got a lot of information on an oncoming famine. So we'll dive into that. What if in 2024 you got a little bit better every day? When you're learning a new language with Babbel, that's exactly what you're doing. And if Babbel can help you start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks, imagine what you could do in a full year. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. 7 days a week at any time of day and taught by over 450 certified teachers so you can learn on your schedule. Browse more than 20,000 classes offered every month. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Me, I love to travel, but not knowing the language of where I'm going can be tough to navigate. Babbel's convenient courses have helped me learn real-life conversational skills like ordering food and asking for directions, and it makes traveling a breeze. Studies continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours could be equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold. Plus, all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for our listeners. Right now, you get 55% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at Babbel.com/SRS. Get 55% off Babbel.com/SRS, spelled BABBEL.com/SRS. Rules and restrictions may apply. Visit Babbel.com for terms and details. Attention creators, we see you guys ripping our content and putting it all over social media. We've seen it on Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, you name it. Here's the deal. We absolutely love it. Some of the reels you guys are making are getting over 20 million views. Here's the deal. We wanted to make it even easier on you, so we've created a link. It's down in the description of every single Shawn Ryan Show episode. It has thousands and thousands of raw cut reels for you to download for free, turn it into your own creation, monetize it, put it everywhere you want. All we ask is that you tag the Shawn Ryan Show in the description. Thank you. Let's see what you got. How many of you have logged into your Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, whatever your streaming platform is, only to find the same mind-numbing content over and over and over again? And then you wind up settling and you just watch that mind-numbing content. Maybe it's time to spend your time learning something that's inspiring and that could possibly improve your life. That's why I'm so excited that Hillsdale College is offering more than 40 free online courses in the most important and enduring subjects. You can learn about the works of C.S. Lewis, the stories in the book of Genesis, the meaning of the U.S. Constitution, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, or history of the ancient Christian church. With Hillsdale College's online courses, they are all available for free. That's right, it's free. I personally recommend you sign up for American Citizenship in Its Decline with Victor Davis Hanson. In this 8-lecture course, Dr. Hanson explores the history of citizenship in the West and the threats it faces today. Threats like the erosion of the middle class, the disappearance of our borders, the growth of an unaccountable deep state, and the rise of globalist organizations. The course is self-paced so that you can start whenever and wherever you want. Start your free course, American Citizenship and Its Decline with Victor Davis Hanson today. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/SRS to start. It's free and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/SRS to start. hillsdale.edu/SRS. All right, Michael, we're back from the break, and now I want to dive into some of the stuff you've been talking about, a famine coming and setting the stage. So I know this goes back to your time in the Netherlands. How does that tie in?
Right, or actually, yeah, that's why I went to Netherlands. Now, in 2020, that was the first time I started warning about potential famine, because I could see conditions were starting to be set for that, right? And it's all about conditions.
You noticed this in 2020?
Oh, yeah. I was publishing it like almost daily back then to get ready for it, get ready for famine, because it's clearly it's a long flash to bang. And so I've been studying it quite a lot. I read a couple dozen books on it now, and on famine. I read more than 60 on pandemic, but I'd read about 40 before the pandemic, because pandemic, famine, and war, they go together. They're a triangle. So you see patterns. And if you get a big war, you always get famine and you always get pandemic. If you get a big one. If you get a big pandemic, a very serious one, you'll always get famine and war, right? They just go together like the triangle of death. So I was talking about this in this interview, and a reader, she called up, she was kind, and she's like, you talk about this as if you made it up. And I said, I did. She said, no, it's in the Bible. The 4 horsemen, right? I was like, yeah, you're right. I literally have plagiarized the Bible. Like, if you're going to plagiarize, I guess go big. But they knew it 2,000 years ago. So all these patterns, nothing's changed. I've started to look at the Bible as like a survival manual. You know what I mean?
Me both.
I mean, seriously, it's like it's all there. Nothing's new under the sun, right? I mean, it's like
a lot of the stuff that's happening today,
yep,
is talked about in the Bible.
It's just
from back then.
It's there. It's like, the only thing they didn't have was iPhones or something. But they saw the human patterns. They knew the human behaviors. The pursuit of money is the root of all evil. How's that? The huge amount. What we see, the problems now is people just going for the dollar, right? Mm-hmm. It's all there, right? And so, yeah. So I saw as you know. It's about conditions. When people, amateur hours, often people are asking me, what will the spark be that does such and such? And I don't mean amateur hour in a diminutive way, but I'm just saying, one thing I learned when I was in the military is I was fortunate enough to be in the same sort of unit that you were, and we were around very serious officers and NCOs, and a lot of them were serious history buffs, right? And what would they often say? It's all about conditions. Set conditions for success, or you're setting conditions for failure. And it's not about sparks. It's a spark that caused the war. It's not, or a spark that you could have a 747 filled with fuel crash into the Darién Gap today, and there's not going to be a forest fire. It's going to burn a big hole, and it's going to burn until the fuel's gone, and it'll be out. There's no conditions for a giant forest fire in the Darién Gap. It'll just be gone. Mm-hmm. And so, but some little kid with a bottle rocket in California, you end up with a town burning down from, a cigarette, right? It's about conditions. It's the same with the famines that are coming. Now, let's rewind in history. As you know, today we have a lot more technology than we had in the past. I mean, that's to state the obvious. And one of those is nitrogenous fertilizers. Now, as the populations on Earth grew, people started using, for instance, fertilizer. They used to use guano, bird guano. In fact, we had forgotten the name of the act, but there was a sort of a guano island act. I've forgotten the name of it. But if somebody found an island that was, mostly guano anywhere in the world, the U.S. military would come with full force and guard that island, because we would use that. There was wars fought over guano, right? Because that was the original nitrogenous fertilizer, right? So now as populations grew and we cut off Germany from guano and whatnot. And by the way, guano is believed to be what led to at least the potato famine in Ireland that started in roughly 1845. People argue about that, but and ended in maybe 9 years. They argue about when it started and ended, but it may have been some sort of disease that was in the bat guano, but this is unclear, but that's a separate story. But the bottom line is, the Germans, as you know, are quite serious about science, and they have been for a long time. And they had serious chemists, and the one was named Fritz Haber. And Fritz Haber in 1903 wrote a book on, he thought that you could take hydrogen off of the natural gas. This is very important. And you could combine it with the nitrogen that we're breathing and make ammonia, right? And with that ammonia, you could make explosives, right? And you could make fertilizers. And so both, right? So, but it was very difficult to do it. So he theorized it in that book on thermodynamics, and then in 1903, and then in 1908, he actually made a little bit, right? But it was difficult. He was a good guy at little stuff, but not. So that's when Carl Bosch came along. Carl Bosch is another German chemist, and he was able to take that really smart idea and make it industrial. That's why it's now called the Haber-Bosch process. Fritz Haber came up with the idea. Carl Bosch took it corporate. And they started at Ludwigshafen, Germany, at BASF plant, right? The BASF plant, this is really important. So I hope everybody's paying attention, because this is all going to come together. Mm-hmm. The BASF plant on the Rhine River dumps out at Rotterdam. And interestingly, so they started making the nitrogenous fertilizers there in 1914, right? Same year the Panama Canal opened, right? Coincidentally. And so the population on Earth started to explode, partly because of increased trade. The ships were bigger, the ships were faster, the trains were bigger, refrigeration, all kinds of things. But a huge one was nitrogenous fertilizers, right? So other companies started to make nitrogenous fertilizers. A huge component of these nitrogenous fertilizers, though, is natural gas, because you need that hydrogen, right? You can make it other ways, but in reality, it's natural gas, right? And so one of the reasons I've been so accurate on the wars, and that's what I'm actually known for, is being accurate way ahead of time, is because when I was a kid, I was pretty much addicted to physics, right? I always thought I would grow up to become a physicist, and somehow I grew up to be in the Darién Gap. But so it's kind of it's only in America can you do these like wild go around Pluto and loop back and land on Mars, And so, but that trained my way of thinking, right? Reading people like Richard Feynman and whatnot, and all these physicists, and not teaching you what to think, but how to to develop ways of thinking that you can try to arrive at truth, right? That's why I love physics so much. Actually, I started loving chemistry, and I was like, that's just chemistry. Physics is where I can find the truth, right? And that's why I spent so much time on that. And but one of the things I've learned from reading those guys so many years, especially when I was younger, was if you have a theory, I call it the paradigm, and it's inaccurate, then you either have to tweak it or throw it out, right? Never get emotionally stuck on your ideas, right? Mm-hmm. It's just an idea.
Man, that's great advice just for everybody today.
Yeah. I mean, I learned it from those old physicists. They would be like, so-and-so got stuck on his idea and basically became a worthless scientist. You know what I mean? Because he became emotional about his idea. It's like you have to be, and Einstein never got that way to my knowledge. I read a lot of his work, and he never got stuck on his ideas. He was always like, I'm probably wrong. I might be wrong about gravitational lensing or whatever. He turned out he was completely right about gravitational lensing and these sorts of things, right? And so anyway, so I just learned how to, and so I would write. When I was a teenager, I would write down what's the percentage chance that I think, I don't know, that bird's going to take off in the next 5 minutes based on the time of day and all this stuff. And I'm just like, I don't know, 70, and I would just start training myself to, over time, I'd done that a lot to the point where I was starting to get a little bit better at actually guessing things. So I thought that the Darién Gap might open it up, and now it is, right? I thought that they might tear down the wall and on the border, and I started publishing this immediately when Biden was installed. Now, they haven't torn it down, but what they have done is just leave it open, basically. It doesn't exist anymore, right? And all of this was accurate based on the paradigm. Now, the paradigm, I also thought, something will happen to Nord Stream. So I went to BASF twice, right? And on the second time, we're doing a tour of BASF, and I asked the guy, what happens if Nord Stream gets interrupted? Now, keep in mind, I had bought an iPad that was on a website that did nothing but watch the flows at Nord Stream. And so you could see minute by minute, it would update the flows, right? Because I expected, if my paradigm was right, that natural gas would be interrupted, because I think they're trying to put us in famine, right? And so we're in the plant at BASF in Ludwigshafen, Germany. I said to the man that was giving us a tour, what happens if Nord Stream gets interrupted? He said, BASF is dead. Well, it's not dead, because shortly after that, months later, it was bubbling to the surface of the sea, right? And how did I get that right? Why was I publishing in advance something may happen to Nord Stream? And then it happened. Everybody's like, how'd you get that right? Did you have something to do with it? Nope. That's what I think was going to happen.
Is that article out there?
No, I would just put it like on Twitter and that sort of thing.
So we can find it on Twitter?
Oh, yeah. You can find it on interviews that I did. Why was I even at BASF? You know what I mean? Twice. Yeah. Because that's where the Haber-Bosch press. Okay, so now last March I was in Netherlands again. They had elections, and then I went to Groningen gas fields. That's the biggest gas field in Europe, is in Netherlands. And I was publishing last March, April, and so I think they're going to close Groningen gas field. And people are like, you're crazy. They're not going to close that. They closed it. It's now closed. Why did I get it right? Not by going through every little fact and trying to figure out if he's right, she's right. Skip past all that nonsense. You'll get confused. It's confusing. What does the paradigm predict? That they're trying to put us into famine. If I'm trying to put us into famine, I'm going to start turning off all those natural gas switches. I'm going to reduce the nitrogenous fertilizers. Now, going into famine, there's many things that can cause famine, that can lead to famine. There's different types of famine. For instance, interestingly, I found in a 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, people can find this. It's a 1910, 1911, I think, is that edition. I found it in a friend's home in Texas. And I went right to F for famine. I wanted to see what they were saying about it. This is before Haber-Bosch process was we're talking 1911. Remember, 1914 is when that actually started. And this article is very well written, but it goes and it talks about, well, the big famines are probably over. There probably won't be any more big ones now because we have faster ships, bigger ships, these sorts of things, bigger trains, faster trains. But what they were wrong about was how evil man can be. Because the biggest famines have been man-made, like by Stalin and the Holodomor, like by Mao, by so many of these famines. The 1845 to 1854 famine in Ireland was not all about the fungus and the black potatoes, right? A lot of it was caused by the English cutting them off. Oftentimes when you get into famine, all these other conditions happen, and then your enemy exploits cuts off your ports.
So with the famine that's coming, what do you advise people do to get ready for it? Well,
one thing's for sure, it's not going to be easy, and especially if you live in a major city. One Dutch man that survived the Hunger Winter, that was the Hunger Winter of 1944-45, he said, it doesn't matter if you have a rifle, because they're going to come at you with, 10, 20 men with rifles, right? You're not going to defend your food with a rifle. It's just not going to happen. You're going to have to be prepared in some ways. One of the things you'll find in famines is people hide food. Actually, the the KGB seems to have been a derivative of actually Stalin looking for people hiding food, believe it or not, in Ukraine, in the Holodomor. It's interesting because people found so many clever ways to hide food. They would have a garden that really doesn't produce much, but underneath it, that's how they cover up the burying, or the digging and that sort of thing. But and actually, the bottom line is everybody is going to have a different solution. I mean, if you live in Manhattan, I think you're crazy. I mean, because, straight up, I mean, what are you going to do in Manhattan when everybody's hungry? I mean, people go to cannibalism within 2 weeks, easy. Not everybody. Some people starve to death and never do it, but others go straight to it instantly. And a lot of these people coming in, by the way, through the Darién Gap, I mean, these are people that come from places where they still do. By the way, cannibalism does still exist on planet Earth. Mm-hmm. I assure you, I don't have to assure you, you know that. But a lot of these people coming in are not quite the same as the people, your neighbor. And the moment they get hungry, they're coming into your house, right? Or the moment almost anybody gets hungry, they're going to be coming into your house.
Yeah, once desperation hits.
Everybody's going to have their own solution, but it's going to have to be community based. I mean, one of the things one retired military man told me down in Texas, he started to arrange his community around his church. He went to church and he started taking an inventory of everybody's skills, like what do you know how to do roofs, you know how to do plumbing, you know how to do electrical, whatever, right? So that way everybody knows who knows how to do what, and pulling them together as a community, working with radios, figuring out how to keep communication with each other and that sort of thing. All the stuff that would take to make a small community, right? And one older woman, she's a widow. She's like, I don't have any skills. I just raise my children and my grandchildren and my great grandchildren. He's like, yeah, if you raise that many generations of kids, you got a lot of skills. And he's like, no, just tell me how did you raise them? She's like, well, I can food. And he's like, that's it. All right, you're in charge of canning operations. So what I want you to do is tell me what you need. Tell me everything you need, and then I'll get it. I'll make it appear, and you start teaching the young people how to can.
So set up a community.
That's right. And just like everybody has something, if their heart's in the right place, they have a job, right? Then it takes the leaders, obviously, to pull them together and get everybody, working in their right ways and that sort of thing. But you're not going to make it through without a community, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to have to be able to defend yourself, obviously. But we have a predatory government. Another thing that I've noticed in famines, and this is important, is the governments always go after the farmers. They and every famine I've read about, they always blame the farmers too. They always say, "Oh, it's the farmers. It's the Amish people's fault for something." You know what I mean? It's whoever's fault. They're the ones gouging you for prices or whatever, right? And then they come and then they take over those facilities, and nobody knows how to farm like the farm. That's one of the things I wanted to say. Finish what I was thinking about the Dutch. A lot of those farmers who have been farming or fishing that land or water for so many years, they know exactly when to plant. Like, when the last snow melts in that little crease over there, that's when we plant. It's a very local knowledge. And that's one of the ways they get such high production from the land. First of all, it's partly scientific, increased, scientific methods, but they know their patch of turf very well. When the crickets come out, it's time to do X. You know what I mean? It's but if you take them away from that land, they're not going to be as good a farmer if you put them in Kansas. They're still going to be a good farmer, I'm sure, but you know what I'm saying.
I do.
They got to fight their own terrain.
So, for the people that are listening that we've just scared the hell out of with the famine, best thing is for them to build community.
Build community, definitely. And you need a way to defend yourself. And again, I mean, if you live in a city, I don't know what advice to give you other than get out.
Yeah.
I mean, would that cause the cities to empty out? I mean, look what's happened. Look who's moving into New York. People that don't speak English, they don't even know how to flush a toilet. I assure you, I spend most of my life in these other countries, and some fish don't mix well in the same aquarium. There's cultures that just don't go well together, right?
Yeah.
Bottom line, you put some sort of fish with the goldfish. Bye-bye goldfish.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what's going to happen.
Well, get out of the city. But
I hate to say it, but I mean, that's what I would do.
yeah. Well, Michael, I really appreciate everything you're doing. You just gave a ton of knowledge, especially when it comes to the Darién Gap, what the CCP's up to, and the oncoming thing. And I just want to say thank you for coming here and getting the info out.
Thank you for being so patient. It was, as you know, kind of challenging to get our schedules to meet up. I've been trying hard, and we did it.
Well worth it. Well worth it. But and I hope to get down there with you soon. Down there in the Darién Gap. All right, brother. Be safe. Hey everybody, I'm Shawn Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Shawn Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.